Hi, and welcome to the fifth in this five-part series on playing middle pair. My name's Ben Hayles. This is brought to you by Postfloppoker.com, and this is my examples video. So on the back of the first four videos that I hope you followed in some kind of logical sequence, you arrive at the examples video with lots of thoughts about these things we've been going through: equity, post-flop situation, stack to pot ratio. If you're thinking about these things as we go through the examples, then I hope you'll see how beneficial they really are. So, first example, King 9 suited, played out of position, and this is to highlight what can happen when your hand does improve. Okay, so to the analysis, King 9 of hearts on the hijack, raised up in the early stages of an SNG, nice and deep stack, so very relevant to cash game play. And the big blind calls as well. And we see a flop of 4 of hearts, jack of spades, 9 of clubs. Big blind checks, decisions on me. Do I see bet? Answer: yes, I need to isolate. I have got good equity. I have got value in making the c-bet. It is going to be tricky to play, and I am building a big pot. SPR 7, difficult to play. Don't want to build a big pot, but I do need to isolate, and that kind of trumps any desire to keep the pot small here. So definitely c-bet and keep it a decent size, which I think I do. Get called by the cutoff, which is never great because he's the guy in position, and big blind folds out, so we successfully isolate, and the turn card improves our hand. So there were a lot of mediocre turn cards that were going to come down. There were a lot of difficult turn cards, and there were just a handful of good ones. And as we mentioned, one of the benefits of middle pair is that it can improve. It's not going to improve very often, normally just around 20% of the time, and it has improved here to the best possible hand that we could hope for. And we should go ahead and bet because there's still loads of hands in our range that we're going to double barrel here. So this shouldn't be too this should be confusing for our opponent, and I expect him to fold quite often in this spot. And when he calls, he's either going to have a really good draw like Queen 10, or he's going to have a jack and occasionally a 9, and really occasionally a full house, although he may also raise with the really strong hands here. So going into the river, do I bet again? Of course I'm going to bet again. It's all about extracting value. I've got 1,072 in my stack, the effective stack. There's 1,042 in the middle. So I could just go for an all-in. What's going to call me? Well, probably a big jack. Queen jack, king jack, ace jack. I don't know. He should be folding a weak jack, I guess. And I think I'm losing action from everything weaker than that. Obviously, I'm getting called by the 9 as well, and a few hands that actually beat me. But if I go all in, I'm doing okay, but I'm losing a bit of action from a fair chunk of his hands. I think going in with all your chips here is potentially the best play still. I chose to do something quite different and bet an amount which I feel makes it look like I might fold if he pushes. The problem with this bet size is when he does make the sensible play of just flat calling with a jack, I'm not extracting enough money. So overall, I don't think this is the best play. I think a push is better. But you'll see that despite that, I do get the push over the top, which in this case I think is a misplay from my opponent. But it just shows that sometimes enticing weaker opponents with this type of bet is exactly what you should do. I mean, I'm looking for him to do this with Queen 10. You know, I'm looking for the missed draws and the air to think, well, he looks like he's going to fold, so I'm going to push. So that's the reason for the bet sizing. You may disagree with it in this spot. I think it's an okay play, but overall, I think probably better to shove and make sure you get the value from Jack X. My opponent, by the way, shows Jack 10. If Hold'em Manager catches up with me, there it is, Jack 10 suited. Example number 2 is a heads-up example when I'm holding Ace 7 offsuit in post-flop scenario 2. It's really deep stacked, and I raise in position, I'm called, and then the opponent leads donk bets into the flop. It's about how we deal with resistance in the hand, and I think that's the main learning point, I guess. So it's heads up at the end of an SNG. It's deep stacked, very deep stacked, and I'm raising from the button with a wide range, including Ace 7 off, and my opponent flat calls the raise from the big blind. So there's 2-7-4 in the middle, flop 9 of hearts, 4 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds, and I'm facing the donk bet. It's a small donk bet, which is consistent with a lot weaker hands. Larger donk bets tend to be top pair and better, a few drawing hands. Smaller bets tend to be more drawing hands, more bottom pairs, middle pairs, junk, as well as stronger hands. So I'm usually more inclined to raise the smaller donk bets and to flat call the larger ones, and I think that's really good general advice with this type of hand. You could flat call here, and I think flat calling is okay, but I prefer the raise. I think your opponent may be getting pretty good value with some pretty dodgy looking drawing hands. You want to be just charging them a bit more for the privilege. 4 of hearts looks like a decent card, feeling pretty happy. My opponent, if they've got a 4, obviously has got a whole load of more hands that beat us. Not just the 9, but the 4. But still, overall, I feel like my equity's strong. And this time, instead of donk betting, my opponent checks. And I decide, I think there's a good chance my opponent's drawing. I decide to double barrel. I could have delayed this. I could have checked behind and used the turn for some pot control. But I felt like that there was still value. My opponent could call along with the draw. We might make some more chips and we can check behind, potentially on the river instead. So I've got my eye on some pot control, but I've decided to delay it till the river. This time, my opponent comes over the top with a huge check raise, which is a very good bet. It leaves me in a decision for the entire tournament in some ways. It's a very difficult bet to call, and through the middle pair videos I've been advocating that you fold to resistance. This is a spot where there's no way I can continue. It doesn't matter that I know my opponent could have a lot of drawing hands and be making a very smart play with one of those hands with a semi-bluff, testing me out, making me fold hands exactly like this type of hand, but also other hands that are weaker, pocket pairs, small pocket pairs, and potentially even a top pair that I decide to fold. It's a really good play. And it will, of course, also be a 9 or a 4 and some really good hands as well. But probably getting a mix of those drawing hands with those really strong hands. It's still the entire range of my opponent is too strong for me to justify putting more chips into the pot. So it's a fold, and we don't see our opponent's hand. Example number 3 sees me holding Jack 10 suited in post-flop scenario 1, which is the raiser in position. And it's all about how committed I am with middle pair in a low stack to pot ratio situation. And so that's really what I want you to focus on when we're analysing this. Okay, Jack 10 suited in a sensitive SNG bubble situation, played from the button, and I've decided not to shove into these weak opponents who are likely to call. So I've gone with a smaller raise, and they failed to shove back. They both flat call, which I know looks a bit unusual, but it does happen on the lower stakes, this type of thing. And I've flopped myself middle pair with an average kicker, and I'm not feeling too good about it. I feel really conflicted now in terms of my commitment to the hand. 1200 in the middle, 2700 left in my stack. It's going to be really difficult to negotiate a fold in this hand. So with that being the case, let's throw away all the hands that we might be up against when we're beaten and think about only the parts of the ranges that where we're ahead right now. So if they're holding any hand from 10-9 through to really weak hand like pocket twos, how can we make money from these hands? And then also the draws, ace jack, king king 9, all the combinations of draws that are out there, the straight draws. There's a lot of hands where we can make money by being more aggressive than by being really passive, and circumstances help us achieve that in this hand. There's a small bet. The small blind folds. So now there's 1400 in the middle, and his stack's really short. The SPR is really only 1 against this player. So my commitment to middle pair has just got all the greater. Yeah, sometimes he's going to have a queen, and I'm just going to lose my money. But I'm going to lose my money anyway against a queen, because I've decided that if he bets, I'm going to call. He bets again, I'm going to call, and I can't really justify folding based on my equity in the hand. It's going to be strong enough considering what's already in the middle. So unless I've got a really, really clear read that he would only donk bet with a queen, then I'm going to consider there to be a lot more hands in his range. So plenty of drawing hands where he's just making a little feeler bet like a lot of players do. And this sizing of bet is often a weaker type of hand. So I really think there's loads of 7/8s, that type of hand in his range, absolutely filled with those types of hands. It's not impossible that it's even a weaker 10 or a 6. So I'm not just going to let this lie and call. I've decided I'm going to gamble, and therefore it's going to be a raise. And I'm going for 2 chunks. I'll raise to an amount I think I can get weak hands to call, and then shove any turn virtually. So he calls my raise to a spades, has not helped any drawing hands, which I think are more and more in his range the more the hand goes on, because of his sort of weak donk bet call on the flop. So for me now, it's no question, this is the time to get my chips in. I'd love him to fold, no problem if he folds. So definitely put the chips in now. He does fold, and make the most of a potentially hazardous situation in a bubble situation. In example number 4, I'm holding Queen 10 offsuit in post-flop scenario 4, which is the one where you're sat in position, but you've defended pre-flop, and then you face a continuation bet, And if you remember from the third video, I've recommended a betting line where you're usually going to flat call with middle pair in this spot. So it's exploring one of those hands. Back to the early stages of an SNG and Queen 10 offsuit in position from the big blind. Small blind raises in the minimum. Flat call pre-flop should look very natural. I'm going to be doing that with Queen 10, I think, every time. See a flop in position, and my opponent makes a c-bet. Definitely want to call. If I raise, I run the risk of making a big pot with middle pair. That's not too smart. I knock out some of his air, which I don't want to do. I want to keep it in and make him make more mistakes. So definitely like flat calling. Not a fan of raising in this spot. Six of spades is a good turn card because it's not a diamond. It's not a high card like a jack or a nine or something that might complete some of the possible big hands in your opponent's range. So basically, yeah, really enjoying the six of spades. It's going to encourage me to get to a showdown with my high amount of equity. My opponent bets quite small, just less than half the pot. Really want to call it again, get to showdown. And this is the call line, which I don't like taking often, but I think in this type of spot really does make sense. Your opponent's kind of doing your job for you in that he's keeping the pot nice and small, and you're just not bloating it any further. There's still kings in his range, and it's important to limit the damage against that type of hand. If he has the audacity to triple barrel the river, then we can expect now to be up against King X, or he's turned any type of hand into a bluffing hand. And I think some of the time there's going to be bluffs here. So 25% of my pot odds, and that's the pot odds required to call. I'm definitely winning this 1 in 4 times. So straightforward call. No point in raising, obviously. His response to that would be to fold out all the worst hands and call only with better hands. And so in this spot you can see he was actually making that play with just middle pair and probably overdoing it. Like I've been saying in this series of videos, if you're playing middle pair, you normally want to slow down on one of the streets, bit of pot control, and that costs him a little bit here in the triple barreling with just a weak middle pair. It's probably not the way forward. Okay, example number 5. I'm holding 10-9 offsuit, and I'm in post-flop scenario 6. Remember, the worst of the post-flop scenarios, one where you're defending and you're out of position. Okay, pre-flop, I'm heads up. I choose to call out of position. I don't do this very often, but in this spot, I feel like re-raising with this hand is a bit too weak, a little bit dangerous. I think a fold is definitely the worst option. I think I can play it profitably calling, and that's what I decide to do. It creates an SPR of 3 1/3. I do hit the flop, and it's a difficult SPR to be dealing with because, yeah, am I committed, am I not? It's really tricky to know. My opponent's range is wide open, so if you remember from when we were talking about equity, in this spot I'm going to have really quite decent equity, and there's 300 already in the middle, only 1,000 left. So I'm definitely not really focused on folding in the hand. Question is, am I going to make more money with an aggressive line or more money with a defensive line? And I feel like I've started as the defender. It's natural to continue as the defender, and it keeps in a lot of his air and some drawing hands that it'd probably be better to let him lead with. So, unlike in the different example where I felt like raising was going to do best because of all the drawing hands in my opponent's range, I feel like here there's enough air because of his really wide range for me to think that a check call is going to make more money, and that's what I go for. Don't think a check raise is ridiculous, but you are making him fold a lot of those really weak parts of his range. Three of hearts, maybe a card he decides not to barrel. On this occasion, he does choose to check behind, suggesting that he's weaker. And the ace of diamonds comes on the river. Now, I was potentially going to value bet quite a few rivers, but the ace of diamonds is a dangerous card. I feel like he's likely to bet it. It may be a good card for him to even bluff raise all in. So now I'm more thinking about check calling rather than making a value bet. That's what I decided to do. My opponent goes all in, and now I've got to scratch my head and think, well, hang on. Have I got the right odds to call or not? It's quite a good bet on a bluff. And the ace is an ideal card always to do this on. So, you know, he could realistically be holding an ace or a queen. But he could also be holding absolute air. That makes sense too because of the check on the turn. So I'm most expecting to see either an ace or air. The question is, can I win 37% of the time? I decided I thought I could. That's why I made the call. And my opponent showed up with just a completely missed draw, had a gut shot only. And I wouldn't have made those extra chips with a bluff catch had I not taken this defensive line. In the sixth and final example, I'm holding King 9 in post-flop scenario 3, and the decision is whether to double barrel or not. And that's what's really interesting in this hand. Alright folks, so small blind, big blind spot, and I've raised it up to 2.5x. Again, we're nice and deep stacked, so it should be an interesting example. Here you can see the SPR on the flop is very, very large, somewhere around 17, I guess. And a flop middle pair, so Queen 9 8, plenty of straight draws around. Tens and jacks are going to be dangerous cards to face. I'm pretty much just drawing to my 5 outs if I'm behind. Not too pleasant a spot, but both ranges are very, very wide, as in the other blind examples and heads up examples. So in the range versus range war, we're both fairly equal because the ranges are both so wide. I c-bet, which is for value apart from anything, and my opponent flat calls the bet. 3 of spade comes down. Do we double barrel this? What do you think? Interesting spot, right? It's not a great barreling card. We are holding middle pair, so for value, to extract value from drawing hands, it makes sense to double barrel. But it wouldn't be a good spot against someone holding a queen or ace 9 or a stronger hand. There I feel they can flat call behind, maybe raise the river. We could get ourselves in trouble building the pot too big So it's a tough decision. Do we check this one? I think it's a bit dangerous. The 8-9 queen, it looks like our opponent may be drawing. We're deep stacked enough where we could make a double barrel. It doesn't need to be huge, and we can still escape in the hand should we encounter some aggression. So I think overall there's enough drawing hands in his range to justify the double barrel here, and that's what I decided to do. Just slightly over half the pot. Looks like a pretty good size. And my opponent calls again. So 520 in the middle, 1550 left, 8 of spades on the river. I'm now losing to a whole bunch more hands on the river. What sort of range is he calling with if I make a value bet? Well, not many hands that I've got beaten. You know, specifically perhaps Jack 9. Jack 9 and 10-9 are the kind of the only hands I can see getting a call where I'm still winning, and for that reason it's clearly not a good spot to value bet, so it's a check. And my opponent on this occasion checks behind, saves me the headache of whether to check call or check fold, and that decision would have been difficult depending on his bet size on the river. But he shows up with ace-10 suited. He decides not to bluff on the end, and we correctly assessed that there were a lot of drawing hands in his range on the turn, and made the double barrel at the right time to extract full value from the hand. So that's the end of my examples. My name's Ben Hayles. This was brought to you by Postfloppoker.com. Thanks very much for listening.